Hello, my name is Tucker, and today I'll be discussing art as black and white, examining interactions between race and the 20th century through the black artist experience. The goal of this paper and present study is to answer the question of how did African American art throughout the 20th century impact the perspectives of the white majority on the African American community. This question is addressed through the examination of what white reviewers and art writers had to say in regard to the African American artists and their art. This is more closely audited through the experiences of Aaron Douglas, Jacob Lawrence, and Jean-Michel Basquiat in the present study. It is in their experiences with this white majority that it can be seen if there was a change in their perspectives on African American art as a whole, and thus the African American community at large. Douglas, Lawrence, and Basquiat were among the most notable African American artists in the 20th century. Aaron Douglas, through his role as a teacher and his style of painting, granted him the title of the father of African American art. Jacob Lawrence, the painter of the Migration series, used text in conjunction with his art and was notable for portraying the stories of African American people. Finally, Jean Michel Basquiat was one of the most notable and most famous artists in the world. He is notable for the controversy associated with his style of art, along with the raw stardom that he amassed over his short career. These three case studies provide insight into the extent to which African American art throughout the 20th century changed the perspective held by the white mainstream art community towards the African American community. The purpose of this paper is to look at whether the mainstream art world, especially white art critics' interpretation of what was high art, was impacted by Douglas, Lawrence, and Basquiat. How did a group of powerful people, both racially and in their cultural group, interact with a minority group? How were their views impacted by the work of that minority group? To answer these questions, I performed a qualitative content analysis of 40 primary sources about the three artists. The thematic analysis revealed that 9 initial nodes, but these were revised through the focus coding to be two final themes: marginalization and commodification. From these two themes, the sub-themes of racism and white patronage were found to make up marginalization, and commercialism was the driving theme behind commodification. However, these two themes and their sub-themes acted in concert with each other outside of the present study. Racism, either resulting from individual critics' attitudes or the mainstream art system, defined the cultural response to Basquiat, Lawrence, and Douglas. Racism explains why and how the white majority was able to marginalize and control the process of keeping African American art outside of the mainstream. The white majority allowed for only a few African American artists into the sphere of mainstream art at a time, highlighting their uniqueness as African Americans. White patronage was a way to marginalize black artists by controlling the labeling and content of black art as primitive. This allowed for the white majority to specifically control how successful each African American artist's experience was within the mainstream art world. They acted as gatekeepers, but in order to keep control of the artist, as seen in Douglas's case, the patrons would assign the black artists with commissions they did not want to do. Furthering the notion that white artists were gatekeepers to the mainstream art scene, the image of the African American art community and African Americans as a whole were being reproduced and stolen by these white artists. Marginalization isolated African American artists such as Basquiat, Douglas, and Lawrence. Racism within the mainstream system prevented their works from being valued, and white patronage controlled their reach. A connected theme is that of commodification, and of this, commercialism is the driving force. These artists were commodified and commercialized by the mainstream art community for their own financial gain, while undermining the influence of the artists as artists within the community. By racializing Douglas, Lawrence, and Basquiat, the white majority was able to make money off of their art and stardom, but also keep their art at a status tailored to the box that is labeled African American art. The importance of this study lies primarily in the idea that this is only a small window into a much larger issue. The fact that there was no change in the perspectives of the white majority in the mainstream art world shows that there was also little change in the perspectives of the white majority in almost every aspect of the American experience, and the African American experience at that. Prior to the current study, it was surmised that there would be a limited change in the perspectives of the white majority, but there would still be a small degree of a shift in views based on how artists like Basquiat, Lawrence, and Douglas, reached critical acclaim. However, as seen in this study, their fame can be attributed to the white art majority only allowing a few black artists into the mainstream focus at a time, and still with a limited amount of power. Yet, while the present study does lack a broader historical context, it still contributes to the development for understanding how inequality is implemented and how this issue is examined. To address the limitation that this study lacks a full historical context, the primary sources for each artist could be placed along a timeline starting in the 20s and moving into the late 80s. This timeline would show the progression of the civil rights movement and how that impacted how the white majority altered their influence in the mainstream art. The present study holds a broader importance by providing a precedent for other studies within other realms of the arts. Similar studies could be constructed for other areas of the arts like fashion and film, and not just dealing with African American people, but other minority groups within the United States. Hopefully, the case studies examined in the present study would allow for people to grasp the deeper understanding of racial inequality that is present within this country. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the paper. Thanks.